Okay, so I would like to start the discussion with Buddhini first. My question is to you, Buddhini. Save the Children as an organization work with the estate sector for many years in collaboration with government and corporate sector. How do you see the current situation of child protection in the estate sector?
Thank you, Shyamali. In the interest of time, I'll get right into answering the question. I think before I answer the question, I will just clarify what I mean by the estate sector. So, the estate sector is quite a wide a setting which includes different companies, different types of holdings. So you have the regional plantation companies, you have the smallholders, the medium-sized private estates, and you also have the state owned plantations. So we are talking about a really wide scope here, and the issues, the child protection issues, would be very context specific. So you can't say that everything that I describe is actually happening everywhere, right? But I'll just give an overview of what we've seen. So you talked about the current status. Now we all know that currently we are going through an unprecedented multiple crisis situation, right? So this particular time and in space is very unique. So to understand what's happening now, I'll just briefly talk about what was the pre-existing condition, right? So the estate sector, especially the children and the women of the estate sector, have been disproportionately affected in terms of violence, in terms of discrimination. I mean, that's been the kind of the history. I'm telling the historical context, right? When we compare the well-being and the protection and the development of children in comparison to the urban and the rural sectors. So basically, in terms of child protection issues, we've seen everything basically, right? So whatever we term as violence against children, we've seen it. So for example, because of poverty, right, because of those really the root causes of poverty and dysfunctional families and all of that. We've seen sexual and gender-based violence. We've seen child marriage. I mean, some of these things are culturally embedded, right? And some of them are traditional. Some of these things are because there's lack of understanding. We've seen the use of corporal punishment and physical abuse. I mean, some of these things we have solid data for. Some of them is not data-based, but from the practice experience of from people like us and the civil societies who work in the ground. So, I mean, when you talk about the protection risks, they're all really there. So how has the current crisis aggravated it is the real question here. Now, we know that although, like, for example, child labor, right? We'll just take child labor. Child labor is there in the estate sector at different settings, right? Now, we know the RPCs, they manage their staff very well, so child labor is something that they work strongly against. But we have seen child labor coming up in other settings in the tea sector, right? So how would this be impacted by the current crisis? Now we know that parents, because of their livelihoods being lost and because of the multidimensional aspects of poverty and the impact of poverty, a lot of, I think, like Ines mentioned this at the in the morning, a lot of parents are now pushed to actually send their children to work. And we are very judgmental sometimes. We think that, okay, those parents are really bad for sending their children to work. But sometimes it's about whether, it's survival, exactly, right? So and with the problem of labor, we most of the time see exploitation and trafficking, and this is no different for the estate sector. And I think this is something that we see a lot in the media as well, right? Labor and trafficking, we see this in the media. And some of the other more hidden aspects of the impact of the current crises could be child marriage. Again, a practice which is traditionally and culturally promoted, but now economically pushed as well, right? So, I mean, basically, I guess it's a little pointless to talk about the problem and where it's not coming from. So if we look at what's really causing these issues in the estate sector, at a systemic level, we see that there are problems with access to services. The estate sector, we know, is a challenging area setting in terms of geography and in terms of access. So I know there's been a lot of recent efforts to actually engage more with the government and the other stakeholders, but I think there's a long way to go because there's still gaps in access, especially to child protection services. And also in law enforcement, we've seen this. And in terms of community, now, as I said, like, I mean, it's really, the development world is known for kind of going and challenging people's cultural, practices, and, trying to establish a more universal picture of and accepted norms and values. And I'm not saying that is what I'm talking about, but I think where particular norms and values are challenging the protection of the child and the safety of the child, those need to be challenged. So at community level, we see that there are a lot of norms and values that parents hold, which really need to be challenged because those are contributing to the safety of children in the estate sector. And at the family level, we see a lot of dysfunctional parenting and problems between children and parents, the relationships. But also this is aggravated, especially in the current context, by the rise in migration of parents. So the parental care that is available to children is really questionable, and we know that there are children who care for their younger siblings, so the caregiver status is really being transferred to children as well. So these are some of the risks and vulnerabilities that kind of make it more unsafe for children in the estates. And at the level of the child, now we know that because, I mean, this is not the estate, but I was talking to some people in the urban communities where we work with, and the people who were saying that they won't send their child to school in the morning because if the child sleeps till 12, then they don't need to give breakfast to the child because they can't afford 3 meals. So meals start from lunch, right? So basically, these are the impacts that are affecting the child. And if a child doesn't go to school, I mean, I'm not saying every school is perfect, right? But we know that provides like a safe space, hopefully, for the child for at least 6 hours. Now, when that is not there and the child is, free to do whatever, then there's always a risk that the children face. So these are the personal issues that children face, and also the quality of education that they receive, as well as parental understanding of what they really need at this point, especially mental health and psychosocial support, because they're also impacted. I think that's something that a lot of families don't realize, they don't stop to think about. As families, as parents, they're really under a lot of pressure, but what is the kind of pressure that is put on the children is something that we don't really often think about. So all of these things really contribute to the situation of child protection in the estates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Buddhini, for giving kind of a comprehensive overview about the existing situation of child protection of children in this current context, especially who are living in the estate communities. My next question is to you, Johann. As the CEO of Horana Plantation, what is your vision for creating a protective environment for children living in the estate communities? And what are some of the impactful measures and initiatives are taken by Horana Plantations in this regard?
Yeah, thank you for welcoming me here and allowing me to speak a few words and on this panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Um, a vision for my company is the vision that I have for my own children. I would like them to have a better world, to come up and to see that they fit into the world and that they are not harassed during their childhood. So that's the same vision I have for my own people in the plantations. Any plantation manager would love to have that vision going. But it's difficult. You're not talking about a child or two, you're talking about a community where they live differently to us. Their upbringing, their livelihoods, the way they live, it's completely different. So you have to do many things to make our vision their vision. And if my vision is to fall in place, everybody has to be in the same plane, which means the workers, the staff, the executives on the ground, and the executives in head office. So we all have to talk the same language. We all have to have a same vision, and we all have to work towards one vision of making sure that the child is protected. Right now, how do we do that? You can have policies, you can have a system, you can have various things. That is the structure in what you try to work. It has to be doable, it has to be achievable, and we have to make sure that we get towards it. We can have many things in line, but times have changed. The economic situation has changed. As Buddhini say, we see a huge amount of out migration. So what do? We have to proactively change fast, because if we do not change, we find our labor workers dwindling really fast, and we find that the child is getting isolated. So we have to make sure that we get on. We should have the willpower to sit on the same table with everybody and discuss things out. Right now, what the workers' ambitions and their needs are not what they were 10 months ago or 2 years ago. It has changed. It has completely changed. So we have to see how we can fit in, and we have to see how we can come to the same plane and make sure that we understand them better. So that is something that we all have to act fast, otherwise we are going to end up with a very an estate without workers, I would say. So this is a challenge that all of us have right now, and this is something that we have to be doing very fast. And in doing so, we have started understanding the people. We are trying to find ways and means. We are trying to give midday meals. We are trying to give nutrition meals. We are trying to pinch into their family lives, as it were, and try and help them in any way that we could. The government of Sri Lanka cannot do much right now in what their situation is. So I don't think asking for many things is not going to be possible. But I think the NGOs and the INGOs who are working, if we all get together and we formulate something together and we work towards a vision, I think that will be very useful, because otherwise our efforts go in different directions and the money that we spend will go in different directions. So we have to know what the need is right now, and we have to know where we are going and what we are doing. And my vision for our plantations is to make sure that our children are looked after the same way that I was looked after, or my children were looked after. I know they are not privileged as going to better schools or good schools, but the schools they have, make sure that there are no dropouts. Try and go behind the dropouts. We had COVID. We did our best. We went online. We got people to study online. We kept them employed. We got them books. Many things that we did in small ways. We have got mobile libraries now, so we're trying to expand it. Power was an issue, so we have to see that we try and get some sort of energy to them to see that they can study. And then we also have one vision that I really want is to make sure that we have a safe place for children to study, which I don't see in the plantations, which I'm trying to work with other NGOs to make a place where you can have a huge study room or somewhere with somebody where you will have protection for the children to study at their own wills, because If you expect a child to study in his dwelling, it's difficult because the community that they live in is difficult. And we have to have protection with uh, even sad to say the drugs have reached the plantations as well in many forms. So we have to keep the children educated, we must keep them informed, we have to keep the parents informed of the goods and the bads and what happens, and especially the mothers, we have to keep them in because they are the backbone of a family. We have to keep them strong, we have to keep them employed, we have to keep them enough money to see that they can run the family, and financial stability, that is how you spend your money and on what you spend your money right now is of major importance. So those are the things that we have to do, not many things, just 3 or 4 things without confusing them. I think that is what we should be doing right now. That's my vision.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Johann, for sharing those practical measures you have already initiated within your plantation company. Especially, I would like to ask a little bit more about the safe place to study. Could you please elaborate a bit about how the Horana plantations implementing this intervention in the estates?
Yeah, we have thankfully we are certified under two. We have something called fair trade, which we are certified, and they have funded us to have big spaces like halls, and we are using that for the children to come and study. But those are only on a few estates. So my vision, as I said, is I want to build up. We have buildings that we can renovate, take it back, and I would like to see that the children are comfortable there, and see that they can study, and we even go forward doing otherwise. Now, in my previous place, we even got a NGO to fund a IT center for the people. So if we can get something like that, where because right now the parents can't afford children to go to learn a basic IT by bus, they have to go to a town. All that is money. And then their security, when they come back, you don't know where they have gone. So that works on the mother's head. So then the outturn falls, then the productivity falls. So it's a ripple effect that you have. So I need to see that the children are well educated, and we have to learn, we have to understand the people are not going, most of the people are not going to join the plantation. That's not a problem. There are ways and means of running plantations. If you get into machinery, and if you make machinery work and you pay them well and make them technicians and things like that to work back onto the estate, they will come back, because the social stigma of calling a plantation worker has to go out. So that is something that is a different story. But if we can find places to study, we have found little places, and we have gone online. There's something called DP Education Online, where NGOs again have pumped in some screens for us, and where we had sessions, and we had a teacher, or we had an adult teaching them right throughout. So that's what I did.
Thank you very much. I think those initiatives are really important when we are talking about creating a child protective environment for children. My next question goes to Milani. As an activist and founder of the Child Protection Force, which aims for creating a protective environment and equal legal rights for children in Sri Lanka, what is your experience in terms of accessibility in child protection services by the children and families living in the estate communities, and what are the underlying reasons for that situation?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here as well. So, I mean, it's access to child protection services. Currently, in our system in Sri Lanka, we have few actors within this system, and some of these people who really work hard that we've worked with are the actors within the district level secretariat and the provincial secretariats, where we have child rights protection officers, we have early childhood development officers, we have youth counselors, women's development officers, and so on. On the other hand, we also have our, she was looking at me, we have our divisional national child protection authority officers, and these officers are on the ground, they're on the field, and that is what they're required to do, and also the probation officers who are required to submit reports to court. And most part of their job is to actually visit these children and to make sure that these children are all right all around Sri Lanka. And they have, the National Child Protection Authority has a wide mandate for protection of all our children. But there is a problem here. There is also a police women and children's bureau, especially for women and children. The one problem that I have seen so far is the lack of resources. So the national budget allocation is also very minimum, and of course it is mostly from the INGOs that these organizations also get most of their funding. So one of the biggest problems that I have seen is the lack of resources, and we all know what the estate areas and the area of travel and even within these communities. So if you expect a probation officer to visit a house, let's say a protection matter, after I am also going to talk about few examples here, so if there is any this is a trigger warning. So when the officer has to go to the house of the child who is a survivor of crime, they don't have fuel, they don't have a bike, they can't go by bus, it's a long way to go. So these are the issues when the children in these particular communities don't have access to child protection services, and it gets neglected from there. For example, we had one case where there is a drug user. I'm thankful that he brought it up, because there was a drug user who had built up a little bamboo hut, and he had this ugly picture of something with like lamps lit all over, and he was dancing naked and tied the child up and made the child watch him, right? And then he had also given her a packet of I presume it's methamphetamine ice, commonly known as ice, and asked her to drink it. She's 9 years old, right? And thankfully she didn't drink it, but the fact that this child, it took her about 3-4 months to talk about it, because she didn't know. School had a program for children where they said, you know, they spoke about body safety and all that, and that is when she started getting affected. She started having anxiety attacks, and she was admitted to hospital, and that is when she told. And the problem goes further when we went to the police station and we said, okay, there is abuse, but there is no grave sexual abuse here, so he's going to easily come out at the police station itself. But can you investigate on the drug? And I told the police officer, you and I both know that this was methamphetamine, it was ice. Can you investigate on that so that we can get a heavier term so that this child is safe? But they didn't, law enforcement didn't do that investigation, and so because the child and the mother had to be sent away, and this guy is out. So these are some of the things, and I think also Ms. Buddhini will agree that Sri Lankan laws and policies are already there. It's already existing. We have the systems in place. It's a fact that there is a serious lack of implementation by law enforcement. And again, I would say one of the reasons would be lack of resources. And the spreading of this, the drugs right now, currently as we speak also, the drug ice is all over. It's very easy to find ice, and I think Sri Lanka is now becoming a USA in 1980s when it became ghost towns and methamphetamine was all over the place. And I mean, we are also aware that workers within the estate sectors are on ice and they work with ice, and then with our research we have found out that most of them are also very violent after using this particular drug, as opposed to say heroin or something else. And within the past 2 months, I mean, we are a very small organization, we only have 4 lawyers with us. We have been getting at least 5-6 cases a day, and every accused party is on ice. Even this morning, even right now I'm getting calls because there are survivors of domestic violence asking to be rescued by ice drug users, and it is all over, and a lot of children being used also. And we spoke about migration for working, and then the mother goes abroad, and then like you said, the older child will be the one to take care of the other siblings. And we have had fathers who have said, yes, I did have sex with her because my wife is no longer here, and she's taking care of the other children. She's cooking, she's cleaning, she's doing that. So she's going to have sex with me, right? So she's about 12 to 13 years old. And then we had another father who said, yes, I had daughters because, I planted trees to eat the fruit, because he was raping all three of his daughters, right? So these things have become normalized. Also, again, like he said, because of the lack of awareness also. And when we tend to do these community workshops, when we tend to do workshops for children, that is when they actually reach out. So that is where we need to start, where we empower these actors who are within the state already, so that they can actually go and start doing these workshops without always relying on civil societies or INGOs to come and do the work for you, right? So like basically train the state actors to handle it on their own. So yes, I personally think, I don't know, it's not a statistic, I think that there may be a lot of estate sector children who are already very vulnerable or already going through crime against them, but they don't have the means to reach out, or they're scared to reach out because almost always they're also threatened, and they're scared to come out, or they're threatened with things like, I will kill your mother, in a already domestic violence environment family. And the violence is very high. There's a lot of alcohol usage, as we know. So even, I suppose, the women tend to get violent, and ultimately the children fall through the sieve.
Thank you very much, Milani, sharing all these the practical situations happening in terms of children's issues, the protection in terms of many areas. She covered the root causes as well and the triggering factors as well. I would like to move to the next round of questions for the panelists. This round will be having only 4 minutes for the panelists, because we need to save some time for the questions from the audience as well. So I would like to start the second round again with Buddhini. Since now we all are aware about what are the emerging child protection issues and causes, as well as what are the gaps in terms of, many of you have mentioned the resources, budgets, lack of awareness, lack of commitments, and prevailing values and norms in basically in the plantation sector. So considering all these factors, as an organization technically supporting to all the stakeholders in the country, what is the strategic vision of Save the Children in creating a protective environment for children living in the estate communities, especially within this current context?
Thanks, Shyamali. Before I come to the vision, let me just explain briefly how we got to this point. Save the Children in Sri Lanka has been working for about 50 years now. And we've been engaging with the estates as much as any other sector in Sri Lanka for quite a long period of time. But how we've kind of, right at the beginning, Save the Children was a service delivery organization. So, responding to the humanitarian crises and emergencies, etc. So after that, after a period of that, when we realized that actually the government systems were getting stronger, and the government services are actually able to, deliver those services to some extent, we kind of changed our role to become a more advocacy-focused organization and to provide technical support for the government. But even at this point, we were really focusing on government and INGOs and, a little bit about civil society, true. But I think we had left out a really key, area, a really key stakeholder in this process, and that's the private sector. And it is during the last few years, last 6, 7, 8 years, that we have really started to engage with the private sector. And the estate sector, it's unique in its setting, right? The people who live in these plantations, they don't have all civic rights. They're almost like quasi-citizens, right? And they do depend on their employers, especially the plantation company owners, for their well-being, for their livelihoods, etc. So that is a very different kind of life to the other people who live in this country. And that is why we realized how important it was as an INGO to really start working with the private sector. And it really worked well, because I think, like Johann will agree, we had our clashes at the beginning. But I think through, a shared strategic vision to really understand, what is it that we all really want eventually for the children in the estates. I think, as Johann mentioned what his vision was, his vision and our vision isn't very different. Now it's, it's aligned, right? But it may have not been that some time ago. So, or maybe the modality to reach that outcome would have been different. So I think working with private sector, and I'm not just talking about tea, I'm talking about if you're working with any industry, I think it's really important to engage the industry players themselves, and we are not very good at doing this. So our vision is to really create that collaborative and coordinating environment among industry, government, as well as civil society, to work together to address these problems. And now I'm actually bringing the role of civil society here, because our recent change, at Save the Children, we are now working through strategic partners, and the center is one of them. And this is through recognition of the really important role strengthened civil society can play, especially as a catalyst for change. As Milani said, it's not to actually deliver services and to duplicate the efforts of the government or to do what the government should be doing, but to bring these players together, to be that catalyst, to be the change maker and the driver. And that we see as really key for local civil society, that role. And in all this, we have to remember, as I said before, the kind of the changing, the landscape, the cultures, the traditions, the changing socioeconomic setting, the context for children. Children today are definitely not children as we used to be. And I think that kind of recognition, and to respond to that changing environment and changing needs, you can't rely on one sector alone, one kind of entity alone. And we need that cross-sectoral collaboration to really, recognize those changes and to respond to them. So that is what we are hoping we can achieve together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Buddhini, explaining the strategic vision of Save the Children in terms of creating a protective environment for children, not only for the plantation sector, but across the country, engaging different stakeholders, as well as moving with the changing dynamics in this the world, which pushing and pulling children into risk situations. My next question is to you, Milani. You explained most of the existing gaps and challenges we are going through in tackling the incidents related to children's protections. What is your ask from public and private sectors to ensure children have equal access to child protection services and legal rights? Because we are also having the audience which represent different stakeholders in the tea industry, which includes government, private sector, civil society organization, and the development sector.
Thank you. So like Ms. Buddhini said also, it is necessary that there is a multidisciplinary team approach. So the corporate sector with these actors and the state and also civil society. Because for example, the earlier case I was talking to you about this man, so all this information was told by the child to our psychologist and not to law enforcement. Because law enforcement is in uniform and they're very scared and they don't talk. In other countries, correct me if I'm wrong, children are, if there is a crime against a child, there is a forensic interview done for the child by a specially trained officer, and that is what is used at trial, because that interview is specifically to get a good case for the prosecution. So we don't do that here. The child is subject to so much of secondary victimization where she or he has to go and talk to 25 other people about how they got raped. So getting raped again 25 times, right? So these are the trainings and the awareness that we can do for our state level actors, so that they are aware of how to be sensitive towards a child. So this is with regard to protection. A crime has already been committed. But with regard to prevention, how do we prevent this is very simply education and awareness. And frankly, I think that child protection needs to be part of our education curriculum. And we hope that it will someday see the light of day. But within the sector and within the plantation companies, and I am aware that there is daycare centers called a creche. Yeah, so I am also aware of some of the people who have been working in these places. They maintain excellent books of attendance and the names of children and all that. But then I have also come to realize that the daycare worker is a woman who is suffering severe domestic violence for the past 10 years. So how are we to know that her mentality is in a okay place to take care of 20 other children? Right, so these are the things that I suppose within our plantation organizations need to look into, to do a screening of the workers within the daycare centers, and also to do trainings on child protection. And I'm sure there are a lot of organizations like SAVE, like us, very small, but where we will come and do these trainings for the daycare workers, for the caregivers, so that those children who come into these places are safe and they are able to identify if something is wrong with the child. So almost always, if there is a behavioral issue, it is because something is going on at home. So if our caregivers are trained enough, and teachers within the schools, within the estates, if the teachers are made aware, if they are trained enough to identify issues, then a lot of these matters can be prevented. So awareness is key, and education within the schools, and these are, they're not rocket science. They're easy things that can be done with not much of expense, I suppose workshops are.
Thank you very much, Milani, for sharing those practical thoughts and things that we can easily do also in collaboration with other like-minded stakeholders. My next question goes to Johann. We talk about collaboration in many of the answers given by these panelists today, the need of the collaboration. From the cooperative perspective, what kind of collaboration or partnership is needed among the key stakeholders and development agencies as well as government to ensure the protection of children living in the state communities?
Yeah, being in having a policy for child rights policy for so many years, and working closely with the children and Save the Children, plus the government organizations and the police, we have seen a lot of gaps. That is something that I have seen, and what we are trying to address. The plantation management alone cannot undertake this. We are not the experts. We have to confess that. So we need help. We have to reach out to people like Milani and even SAVE, and make sure that our people are trained. So training and awareness is something that has to be ongoing, and refresher courses, because you can't train once and forget about it, because you're talking about the plantation sector and the workers and the children. And awareness to the children is a must, and refreshers to the children in simple ways by way of youth clubs or small societies or creches or creche clubs or mothers forums or whatever. We need help from outside, from the NGOs or somebody, to keep training them as much as possible. So that is something that we welcome, at least my company, I welcome anybody who can train and who is willing to work with me. My doors are open. Then when we come to the government side, as Milani said again, yes, we understand the issues. There is no diesel, there is no vehicle, there is no personnel. But here again, we have reached out, and I have openly told in many forums that if there's an issue of transportation, staying, anything, that we will help, we will transport, we will bring them in, we will do the logistics. And this is something that we all have to sit on one table. Previously I said, we have to sit on a table and thrash out things, because everybody is in his own world, isolated with their problems. It might not be a huge problem for the other person. So I think if somebody says, I have a problem like this, and the other person, my God, I just pass your place, I can pick you up. So it's something like that. So it's a simple thing. So I think we are not talking to each other, and we are having our distances. We have a big ego and a pride to swallow. So I think that it's time that the government sector and the private sector swallows and gets to one place to work and for the benefit of the children, and to have one goal, a common goal to be achieved. The government alone cannot do this. It's huge. The plantations are huge, as you said. It's if you take Nureli district, and with the officers they have 30 or 40 officers or whatever officers they have, covering Nureli district is no joke. Covering my estates alone is no joke. So it's huge. So we have the infrastructure. The plantations are blessed with a beautiful infrastructure and a beautiful system that the foreigners have left, and we have carried. So we have somebody for something everywhere. Something I took out of this is what Milani said about the caregiver in a creche. We have to see her mental status, as she said, whether she is sound. So I think this is something that I will reach out definitely to her, and I will reach out very fast, and I'd like to see all my people being trained. Almost of our people are diploma holders. So it's academically, yes, they are qualified, but mentally are they fit is a question mark which we have not checked. Now here again, I would like to get the PhD. Nobody is from the PhD, but I would like to get the PhD involved. Maybe I can take the message across and see that they bring this into their curricula as well, because they also is structured very well. So one voice can go right around all our plantations in Sri Lanka, at least the corporate sector. So this is something that we need to reach out. There's so many actors where the PhD is very wide verse from all regions, from Gaul to Badula. And then we have the government agencies, the NGOs. I think those are the people we have to follow. And then we have to finally convince our law enforcement officers of how to handle a situation, because they blow it out of proportion. They do more harm than good. So I think that's one thing that we have to tell them, how to handle the situation. And I think we might have to talk to them and get dedicated people, at least 3 or 4 for a region, and train them, teach them, and they be absorbed somewhere else. They may be paid by the police or wherever, but kept on rehearsing or told or whatever how to handle situations, because you are handling children, you are not handling adults. And there are ways and means of how to handle children, because as we see in many cases, the children just don't come and say anything, and the parents threaten the children, don't say anything, because they are put in harm's way. So I think that is where we want everybody to get together, and I think that's where we have to have one fight.
Thank you, Johann. I think the need of collaboration and working together is the things coming repeatedly from all these panelists, and I believe our learned colleagues in the audience also having your own thoughts, how you all can contribute as well. Okay, so now we are moving to the questions from the audience. We have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Please share your questions. When you asking the question, please tell your name and the organization or the agency you are representing here. There will be, yeah, you will get.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And my name is Leelanath Wickramaratche. I am representing Minister of Plantation Industries today, but this is more like a general question as a citizen. So my question is like, when we try to educate, or especially sexual education to the childhood, we often see in the general community there is a huge, objection or sort of like hindrances from the mainly from the religious sector. So how do you see this phenomenon in the tea community or the state community, and what are your thoughts on what are your plans for address that problem? Because why I raise this question is the religious component in the tea sector is bit different from the general community. So how have you come across that question and that issue, and what are your thoughts on that? Thank you. And thank you for the ideas you have shared so far. It was excellent.
And your question is to
Anyone from the panel.
Milani, would you?
So, I mean, without just going on the basis of sexual abuse and everything to be sexual, because there's a lot of various other sorts of abuse, and also the fact that domestic violence is now affecting children a lot. So, when we do these programs, it's also most on emotional intelligence, teaching children how to identify their feelings, teaching children how to identify when something is going wrong. Right? Simple bodily signs, papo dig dig ganawa, bade amaruwa, those things, so that then they know, okay, something's going wrong. So emotional intelligence coupled with this, so body safety workshops. Without, I know this for a fact because I was convent educated. The moment you go near convent and say we want to teach your children about sexual abuse, you can't go anywhere close, right? So this is why. So you change the words, you change the vocabulary into body safety. Talking to children about emotional intelligence, and through that you pass on obviously body safety rules and things like that. So emotional intelligence, I suppose, is a way to go about it, because correct me if I'm wrong, how many times Deviya Ussana Davasata do you get cases of violence? Now these are specifically in the estate communities now. Deviya Ussana Davasata is when the child abuse happens, because these people get drunk and it's all a big jumble. All open, all the children are out there, they are not safe. So that is part of their culture, but then you don't want to accept the fact that children are getting raped, and you want to do something about it. So also it's building that rapport. So I suppose without someone like us going straight into that community, they already built the rapport with you guys. So for you to be trained enough to carry out these workshops and these awareness sessions within your own factories or work settings.
Thank you. I think Tirini had a question. Can you pass?
Thank you. Thank you for your suggestions, thoughts and everything. It's, I think, contribute to protect children in this country, especially in the plantation sector. My question about the community-based child protection mechanism, which currently suggested and running in this country. Especially, question goes to NCPA and Save the Children. Anyone can answer. Community-based child protection mechanism, how effective that mechanism to especially the prevent child protection cases or child protection issues in the country, one. And the second thing is like reporting and like managing cases, especially children with risks. There are 3 types. I mean, children already victim, I mean abused, and children with risk, and the protecting children. I mean, how we safeguard children for the child protection issues. So, what effectiveness of the community-based child protection mechanism, which is running currently in this country, and case management mechanism, what is the I mean effectiveness, and the especially the areas, I mean rural areas, how the government officers and the community knows about the case management mechanism. Those are the 2 things I want to ask. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I think like a community-based child protection mechanism will not be successful if it's not really owned by all the players in the community. So in the estate sector, as we've discussed, we have the company, we have the government officers, we have the service providers, maybe civil society organizations. So just like any other measure, all of these players have to come together if this is to work, right? And I think like this is something that we've seen now in the estate sector, because we have worked with about 7 regional plantation companies, and they have adopted a child protection policy. And one of the things in this child protection policy is to establish a community-based child protection system. Now, because the company is guided through their own policy, and because they implemented it through putting structures and people responsible for this, it is happening. So they have taken ownership of this mechanism, and they are bringing together other people. And I mean, we discussed how difficult it is for government to actually, convene things in this kind of setting. So it is where that the people who can do that kind of takes charge of it and runs with it. There we've seen how effective it has become. And you're talking about the different kinds of prevention also. And this is why I think a community-based child protection system is there, not so much to respond to what has already happened, because as Kala said, once a child is abused, then it becomes the NCPA's problem and the police's problem. Nobody else is allowed to interfere, and that is how it happens. But we have a bigger role to play to prevent violence against children. And we've seen good examples and best practices actually coming out of the estates who've adopted a policy and who've actually implemented these kind of mechanisms on the ground. So case management, since you've mentioned, is something that should happen through a process like that. Because now if you take a village child development committee, which is an example of a community-based child protection system, the GN is the convener, is basically the head of that, right? So then the child rights promotion officer might be there. I'm not saying they're always there, because they have a huge area to cover. The child protection officer might be there. But who's always there is the estate welfare officer, is the teacher, the preschool teacher, or the creche, the manager, right? It could be somebody, a midwife, right? So whoever's really active in that area will be there. And in a place like estates, where the geographical challenge is most acute, you need to use these local players. Right. In case management, I think like during the last few years, there were several trainings also to community-based child protection mechanisms on how to do case management, because it's really important that they understand how to work together to prevent violence through a proper approach. So I think that's how, we can go forward.
Thank you very much, Buddhini. Huge thank to all the panelists for joining today and share all your ideas. For the questions we have raised on behalf. Okay, we are running out of time. Please.
I know.
Yeah.
I'll make it very short.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I must thank the panelists for their excellent presentations. Very informative, very educative. And when we talk about tea plantations, we talk about the organized sector, the regional plantation companies, so on and so forth. And they have a system in place. They have organized structures, they have, say, daycare centers, the crèche. Now it is run by the diploma holders, you have the welfare officers, the executives, so on and so forth. But we have a larger informal sector when it comes to tea. Right? So I, being a lawyer, I have been practicing before I joined the Employers Federation of Ceylon for 12.5 years in Ratnapura, where we had the circuit court in Kalawan. Those are rural areas. There are, the law enforcement, the arm of the law doesn't reach that far generally. So I think compared to the organized sector, I mean, we have to start somewhere, and organized sector, the plantations, the regional plantations could be, easy to begin with. But there's a larger problem out there in the informal sector. It's not a question per se, rather an observation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So now we have to hand over this room for the next panel discussion. Thanks again for all the panelists and for all of you joining for this important discussion. So I think this is the beginning of discussing this subject. Let's look for more collaborative efforts to tackle and address some of the key issues we discussed during the discussions today. Thank you very much.